Good morning, everybody. I am Dr. Nitin Joshi, Professor Neurology with teaching experience of 25 years. We'll continue the second part of TUR syndrome. The next question, Doctor, hyponatremia is one of the components of pathophysiology of TUR syndrome. Describe signs and symptoms as the serum sodium starts falling or decreasing during surgery. The patient is asymptomatic most of the time, still serum sodium is maintained up to 125 milliequivalents per liter. Patient starts becoming symptomatic as the serum sodium falls below 125 milliequivalents per liter. Initially, the presentation will be of agitation, anxiety, apprehension, restlessness, yawning, disorientation, confusion. When the serum sodium falls less than 120 milliequivalents per liter, there will be myocardial depression. This results into decreased cardiac function, resulting into decreased stroke output and hence decreased BP. Because BP is a function of stroke output, heart rate and peripheral resistance. Now, as the serum sodium falls below 115 milliequivalents per liter, then there will be one bradycardia and ECG will show widening of QRS complex, then STT segment, depression, T wave inversion and even appearance of U waves. It may also show the ventricular ectopics. Now, as the serum sodium falls below 100 milliequivalents per liter, then there will be ventricular tachycardia, ventricular fibrillation, cardiac arrest and CNS manifestation will be in form of tonic-clonic convulsion, coma, respiratory arrest and death. Next question, Doctor, what is isothermic TRP? Sir, isothermic TRP is a TRP which is performed by using the irrigation fluid which is warm to body temperature. Next question, Doctor, hypothermia is one of the component of TR syndrome. Explain how hypothermia results into significant hemodynamic changes. Sir, when the body temperature falls below 36 degrees centigrade, then the heat gain region of hypothalamic thermoregulatory center gets stimulated. This results into rigors, that is involuntary contraction of voluntary muscles. These contractions result into heat production as well as increased oxygen consumption above 500 times. This results into hypoxia. This hypoxia as well as hypothermia acts on the cardiac conducting system, that is AC node, AV node, bundle branch, and also on the myocardium. Because of affection of the conducting system, there will be cardiac arrhythmias, and because of myocardial depression, there will be decreased stroke output, decreased cardiac output, and thus fall in BP. And thus hypothermia is responsible for significant hemodynamic changes. Next question, Doctor, in some patients with TR syndrome, initial hypertension is followed by hypotension. What is this pathophysiology of hypotension? The initial hypertension is because of cerebral edema resulting into raised intracranial tension, and as a compensatory phenomenon there will be the vasoconstriction because of the compression of the vessels. This results into central hypertension. But hypotension, there are different mechanisms. One, the most important cause of the TR syndrome is torn venous sinuses. The venous sinuses are wide dilated channels, and so whenever there is torn venous sinuses, there is profuse bleeding resulting into primary hemorrhage, resulting into hemorrhagic shock causing hypotension. Second, that if the patient is having active untreated urinary tract infection, or patient is on PU catheter, or previous history of active infection where the bacteria has been lodged into the prostatic tissue, during this resection there will be release of this bacteria and toxic products in the circulation. Bacteremia, toxemia and septic component is also one of the pathophysiologic mechanism of TR syndrome. This results into release of various cytokines and cytokine soup or cytokine storm. These cytokines has got action on the myocardium of the heart as well as it has got action on the vascular smooth muscle. So because of myocardial depression there will be decreased stroke output, hence decreased cardiac output, and because of vasodilatory effect of the cytokines on the vascular smooth muscle, there's persistent vasodilatation causing fall in peripheral resistance and thus hypotension. So myocardial depression is seen in case of TIA syndrome is because of hypoxia, hypothermia, hypotension, because of the glycine toxicity, because of the septic component release of cytokines, as well as glycine is responsible for increased release of atrial natriuretic peptide causing increased loss of sodium causing natriuresis, and hyponatremia itself is myocardial depression. As well as because of glycine there is dilution of the calcium, and calcium is required for contractile function of any muscle. Hypocalcemia results into impure or defective contraction of the cardiac muscle, and overall effect is hypotension. Next question. Doctor, nowadays the most commonly used irrigation fluid is 1.5% glycine. What is this glycine and what is its fate when it's absorbed in circulation? The glycine is an endogenous amino acid, and when it is absorbed, it is metabolized in liver, kidney and brain. That is, it is broken down into glyoxylic acid and ammonia. Next question. Doctor, what is the normal serum glycine level? Sir, the normal serum glycine level is 13 to 17 milligram per liter. Next question. Doctor, glycine toxicity is one of the component of pathophysiology of TIA syndrome. What is this glycine toxicity? Glycine toxicity is seen only when glycine is used as an irrigation fluid. If the sterile water is used, then glycine toxicity is not seen. The severity and frequency of the glycine toxicity is more when it is used in 2.2% as compared to 1.5% or 1.2%. The glycine toxicity is because of absorption of the fluid, that is, there will be dilutional component, that is water intoxication, and purely glycine toxicity is because of the toxic effect of the glycine, and that is on the CNS, heart as well as retina of the eye. So when commonly used glycine, that is 1.5% glycine, there will be two components, that is glycine toxicity, that is the inhibitory effect on the CNS, heart and the retina of eye, as well as since 1.5% glycine is not really isotonic, that is it is only 230 milliequivalents per liter, while serum osmolarity of the plasma is 290 milliosmoles per liter, and so there will be excess fluid absorption will cause water intoxication or fluid intoxication, and there will be the toxicity because of the glycine. So it has got effect on CNS, retina and effect on the heart. Next question. Doctor, what are the CNS manifestations of pure glycine toxicity? The manifestation of CNS are headache, nausea, vomiting, convulsion, weakness and malaise. The examiner will ask, Doctor, what is the suggested mechanism for the CNS manifestation secondary to glycine toxicity? The suggested mechanism for the CNS manifestation secondary to glycine toxicity is that glycine, like GABA, that is gamma aminobutyric acid, acts as an inhibitory neurotransmitter in midbrain and spinal cord, and in some patients there will be post-TRP encephalopathy because of its action on NMDA receptor, that is N-methyl D-aspartic acid receptor. Next question. Doctor, what visual disturbances patient can get due to pure glycine toxicity? The visual disturbances which patient can get because of glycine toxicity is the blurred vision or foggy vision, or seeing the halos around the objects, or transient blindness which may persist for 24 hours. There will be persistence or preservation of the light and the blink response, reflex, but the pupillary response to the accommodation is lost. The next question will be, doctor, what is the suggested mechanism for these visual disturbances? The suggested mechanism for these visual disturbances is that glycine acts as a inhibitory neurotransmitter in retina of eye, as well as the products of the breakdown of glycine, that is glyoxylic acid, formaldehyde and formic acid, also has got inhibitory action on the retina of the eye. Next question the examiner can ask, doctor, what are the cardiac manifestations experienced by the patient secondary to glycine toxicity, and what are the suggested mechanisms for this? Sir, the patient who experience the cardiac manifestations secondary to glycine toxicity are one, and that is the 20% of the patient will show the myocardial ischemia, which may be transient. Few patients, it is seen in the studies that if the absorption of the irrigation fluid, that is 1.5% glycine, is more than 500 ml, then there is increased risk of myocardial infarction postoperatively. Next, it is also responsible for myocardial depression and decreased contractility and decreased BP because of one, that is ischemia resulting into decreased function. Second, that is because of glycine there is increased release of atrial natriuretic peptide causing natriuresis, hence hyponatremia, causing myocardial depression. Also, because of the glycine there will be dilution of the calcium, relative hypocalcemia, resulting into improper contraction of the cardiac muscle causing cardiac dysfunction. Next question that can be asked, doctor, what is the normal serum ammonia level? The answer will be, sir, the normal serum ammonia level is 10 to 35 milliosmoles per liter. Next question, doctor, why when glycine is used as a irrigation fluid, why there can be development of hyperammoniemia, that is why there is ammonia toxicity? The answer is that the glycine is an amino acid. Normally it is metabolized in the liver, kidney and brain and broken down into glyoxylic acid and ammonia. Normally there is constant and regular production of the ammonia. In spite of this constant and regular production of ammonia, the ammonia level of blood remains constant and low. This is because of the immediate and efficient conversion of ammonia into its non-toxic transport form. The most common transport form of ammonia is glutamine. To some extent, ammonia can be carried as amino acid, alanine and glycine. This glutamine is carried to the liver and kidney. In liver, this glutamine is broken down by enzyme glutaminase into the glutamic acid and ammonia. This glutamic acid is further broken down by enzyme glutamate dehydrogenase into alpha-ketoglutarate and ammonia. This ammonia, which is released from the glutamic acid, enters Krebs-Hanselit or ornithine-citrulline urea cycle in liver. Thus, the toxic ammonia is converted into less toxic urea, which is then carried by the blood to the kidney for excretion. The patient who has got compromised liver function or the suggested mechanism is arginine deficiency, then there will be improper conversion of toxic ammonia into urea. Thus, there will be increased ammonia level of blood, and that is hyperammonemia, and hence brain ammonia toxicity. Doctor, what is the clinical presentation of hyperammonemia in TR syndrome, and what is the suggested mechanism behind this? Sir, the classical presentation of hyperammonemia or ammonia toxicity is seen 1 hour after TRP. Normal serum ammonia level is 10 to 35 milliosmoles per liter. When the ammonia level starts rising above 100 milliosmoles per liter, patient starts showing the signs, that is, patient will have nausea, vomiting and progressing to coma. And the suggested mechanism is that this increased ammonia level will result into inhibition of release of neurotransmitter, particularly noradrenaline and dopamine in the CNS, resulting into brain ammonia toxicity or ammonia encephalopathy. Next question. Doctor, if patient develops hyperammonemia secondary to use of glycine as an irrigation fluid, what is the treatment? Sir, if the patient develops hyperammonemia secondary to use of glycine, then the most common accepted mechanism is arginine deficiency, and so I will infuse amino acid arginine. That is, I will infuse initially 4 grams of arginine over 2 to 3 minutes, and the recommended dose of arginine is 38 grams of arginine over 2 hours. The next question can be, Doctor, what is the rationale of use of amino acid arginine in patient of suspected hyperammonemia in TER syndrome? Answer. Sir, normally the arginine is involved in the last step of urea cycle, where amino acid arginine is broken down by enzyme arginase into urea and ornithine. The urea which is carried by blood to kidney for excretion, but the ornithine which is formed is regenerated and recycled, and it is utilized again and again in Krebs-Henselt urea cycle. The first step of urea is rate limiting enzyme step, where there is formation of carbamyl phosphate with the help of carbamyl phosphate synthetase. In this first step, which is a rate limiting step, the ornithine which is regenerated combines with the activated carbon dioxide and the ammonia which is released from the glutamic acid. We have already seen that in spite of constant and regular production of ammonia in the blood, the ammonia level of blood remains constant. This is because the ammonia, as soon as it is formed, it is converted immediately and efficiently into its non-toxic transport form, and the commonest is glutamine. This glutamine, when carried to the liver, it is broken down by enzyme glutaminase into the glutamic acid and into ammonia. This glutamic acid further broken down by enzyme glutamate dehydrogenase into alpha-ketoglutarate acid and ammonia. This ammonia which is formed then enters the first step of the urea cycle. So glutamic acid broken down into ammonia and alpha-ketoglutarate, and thus the alpha-ketoglutarate which is formed along with ammonia, glutamic acid broken down into alpha-ketoglutarate and ammonia. This ammonia is the ammonia group which is combining with carbon dioxide and ornithine. So if exogenously, if you give more and more arginine, what will happen? Arginase enzyme will break this arginine into ornithine and urea. Urea will be carried for excretion, but ornithine is regenerated. This ornithine which is more and more formed now will combine with ammonia which is released from the glutamic acid. So the glutamic acid broken down into alpha-ketoglutarate and ammonia. This ammonia thus combined with the ornithine. More and more ornithine is formed, more and more utilization of ammonia, and thus ammonia level of blood will fall to normal. And thus the rationale of infusion of amino acid arginine in suspected case of hyperammonemia when the patient has been glycine toxicity in TER syndrome. Next question. One of the component of pathophysiology of TER syndrome is consumption coagulopathy. What is the pathophysiology of this consumption coagulopathy in TER syndrome? The one component of this consumption coagulopathy is water intoxication, that is absorption of huge volumes of irrigation fluid which is electrolyte free. This will result into dilution of all components of the blood, resulting into thrombocytopenia and even the dilution of all the clotting factors. Second component what we have seen, that bacteremia, toxemia and septicemia is one of the component. This results into the release of various cytokines. These cytokines in turn causes activation of the coagulation system and fibrinolytic system. And the third, that is, during the resection there is release of the prostate particles. These prostate particles are rich in thromboplastin. This tissue thromboplastin will responsible for formation of prothrombin converting enzyme. This will act on the clotting factor prothrombin, will convert prothrombin into thrombin. This thrombin will act like an enzyme, will convert the soluble fibrinogen into the insoluble fibrin, which will form meshwork, into which there will be entanglement of RBCs and platelets to form a clot. The formation of clot in turn stimulates fibrinolytic system. More and more utilization of fibrinogen will result into fall in serum fibrinogen, and more activation of fibrinolytic will result into more and more degradation, and hence increased formation of fibrin degradation product. This fibrin degradation product in turn acts as an anticoagulant, and thus there is consumption coagulopathy. Next question. Doctor, what measures you can take to prevent the development of TR syndrome? Sir, in order to prevent the development of TR syndrome, preoperatively, first, if there is already hyponatremia, I will correct it. If the patient is having active urinary tract infection, I will treat as per the culture report. Third, if the patient is the smoker or tobacco user, I will counsel for quitting. Fourth, I will insist for the regional anesthesia, then the spinal. Then intraoperatively, I will stage the procedure. If I am not able to finish the TURP in 90 minutes, this can happen if it is a too big gland, that is more than 45 grams, or if it is a hypervascular gland. I will try to restrict 1. The duration of surgery up to 90 minutes, the duration of resection for 60 minutes, the height of irrigation above symphysis pubis for 60 centimeter, then the head-low position of 20 degree as short as possible. Also, I will try to maintain the intraprostatic and intravesical hydrostatic pressure less than 20 centimeter of water by restricting the height of irrigation fluid above symphysis pubis then up to 60 centimeter. I will use the Iglesia continuous resection sheath rather than conventional. When I am using the continuous Iglesia sheath, I will see that its fenestrations are not blocked. In spite of using the Iglesia resection sheath, I will prevent over distension of the bladder by frequent emptying. If possible, I will use the suprapubic catheter or Reuter's cannula to reduce intravesical pressure, and if the facilities are available, I can use the advanced technologies like laser or the bipolar TR. Next question. Doctor, how will you diagnose TR syndrome? Sir, the diagnosis of TR syndrome is always depending upon the signs and symptoms intraoperatively. The commonest signs and symptoms which are present are yawning, restlessness, agitation, apprehension, disorientation, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, bradycardia, hypertension. Intraoperatively, the supportive measures on the ECG will be in form of widening of QRS complex, ST segment depression, T-wave inversion, appearance of T-waves. Immediately I will ask anesthetist to collect the blood for 1 hyponatremia. This will give me the degree of hyponatremia, and then I can calculate the dose of the sodium to be given. Also, sometimes there can be associated metabolic acidosis, so serum electrolytes with ABG. If I am suspicious about the DIC or consumption coagulopathy, I will collect CBC for the thrombocytopenia, then serum fibrinogen level and fibrinogen degradation product. Later time, suppose I am suspicious of the ammonia toxicity or glycine toxicity, I will send the blood for serum glycine level or serum ammonia level. Next question. Doctor, suppose you suspect TR syndrome intraoperatively, what will you do? Sir, as soon as I suspect TR syndrome, I will ask the anesthetist to collect the blood. I will try to terminate the procedure as fast as possible. I will, if the cause of the TR syndrome is torn venous sinus, in a short time possible, best possible hemostasis I will try to achieve. Evacuate the TUR and blood clots without violent pumping. Try to put the catheter as early as possible and start the irrigation fluid, which is to maintain the patency of the catheter, that too normal saline and warmed. I will start with the supportive treatment for the hypoxia, breathlessness, bradycardia, nausea, vomiting, DIC, hypotension. Next question, it will be, doctor, what supportive treatment you will start for breathlessness in TUR syndrome? I will start the nasal oxygen with nasal cannula. The breathlessness is because of pulmonary edema. So I will ask the anesthetist to intubate, so that after intubation we can give the positive pressure ventilation with 100% oxygen. The cause of the pulmonary edema, one cause is the overload on the left ventricle, causing the left ventricular failure, pulmonary congestion and pulmonary edema. And so the drug of choice in left ventricular failure is injection furosemide, that is Lasix. It is one of the emergency drugs, so it is easily available as compared to any other drug, and it can be used even in compromised renal function. Also, though it causes hyponatremia, in this case this hyponatremia can be corrected later on, because one can use the 15% mannitol, but the problem about that, it is not the loop diuretic, but it's an osmotic diuretic. The furosemide is a loop diuretic, while osmotic diuretic will result into increased initial osmolarity of the plasma. Because of increased osmolarity of the plasma, as per the principle of chemistry, the fluid always passes from low osmolarity into higher osmolarity. Because of infusion of mannitol, there is increased osmolarity of the plasma transiently. So this will result into more and more drawing of the fluid from the cells into the plasma. So this will result further into circulatory overload. So further aggravation of the pulmonary blood vessels, pulmonary congestion, and hence may aggravate pulmonary edema. So if you give initially the loop diuretic, that is the furosemide, then correction of some water intoxication, that is fluid overload, and then it can be useful of giving the 15% mannitol, where it is useful for correction of the raised intracranial tension because of cerebral edema. Because cerebral edema is because of the water intoxication, where the water has flown into the neurons, that is from low osmolarity into higher osmolarity. So because of the fall in serum sodium, there is fall in the serum osmolarity of the plasma, hence flowing of the fluid from plasma into the neurons, causing the neuronal edema, cerebral edema, raised intracranial tension, and cerebral symptoms. At this stage, once the fluid overload partly has been corrected, once you give the 15% mannitol, there will be increased serum osmolarity transiently. This will cause more and more drawing fluid out from the cells. As a result, the fluid will start moving out of the neurons, thus correcting cerebral edema, raised intracranial tension, central hypertension, and cerebral symptoms. However, it is excreted by kidney, and so the disadvantage of this is that the patient who is having the renal failure or compromised renal function, one cannot use 15% mannitol. Next question. What are the other supportive treatment will you give for hypothermia, nausea, vomiting, bradycardia, DIC, and hypotension? So for hypothermia, you have to give warm blankets. Then whatever the irrigation fluid should be warm irrigation fluid, IV fluid, whatever little amount you are giving. Suppose if there is a fluid, water intoxication, then that fluid also should be the warm IV fluid. AC should be closed. Then for the nausea vomiting, injection ondansetron and proton pump inhibitor, that is pantoprazole or rabeprazole. Then for bradycardia, injection atropine 0.6 milligram IV diluted. Also you will give injection adrenaline 1 ampule IV diluted, because adrenaline acts on the beta adrenergic receptors. This will result into action on the pacemaker, that is SA node, AV node, bundle branch, thus resulting into increased rate of the contractility and heart rate. And in case of the bradycardia is also because of hypocalcemia, which is because of the glycine toxicity causing relative dilution of the calcium, and so one can give 10% calcium gluconate slowly over 10 cc of 10% slowly over 10 minutes. So bradycardia. Now hypotension, the pathophysiology of hypotension, it can be hemorrhagic shock. Then in that case we have to give the group specific packed cell, or one has to give the whole blood, whatever is available. Second component that we have seen, that hypotension, blood pressure, it is the function of the cardiac output multiplied by the peripheral resistance. Cardiac output depends upon the stroke output and the heart rate. So bradycardia has been corrected, so heart rate component is corrected because of adrenaline, atropine and calcium gluconate. Now to some extent the cardiac performance has also improved because of the adrenaline. This is because the beta adrenergic receptors are present even on the myocardium of the heart, and adrenaline acts on this, resulting into increased force of contraction. So cardiac performance has also increased, so stroke output will be also increased. So stroke output and heart rate, as cardiac output will increase. But the next component is the septicemia and releasing the cytokines and cytokine storm. And so for this one has to have what is called as the membrane stabilizing effect, so as to prevent the release of cytokines and the cascade of events. One have to give the loading dose of the steroid, that is injection hydrocortisone or DEXA, under the cover of proton pump inhibitor to prevent acidity, and under the cover of antibiotic. So higher antibiotic dose can be given along with the hydrocortisone. It is anti-inflammatory and membrane stabilizing, and so it will prevent the release of cytokines and cytokine storm. Also in case of septic shock, one of the important component of the hypotension is persistent vasodilatation because of the action of various cytokines. And so here the drug of choice will be noradrenaline, because noradrenaline has got preferential action on the alpha adrenergic receptors which are present in the vascular smooth muscle, causing vasoconstriction, thus increasing the peripheral resistance and hence thus correcting the hypotension. This all discussion is required even in septic shock and even sometimes cytokines, as a short note. Next question, that is in case of DIC, what supportive management? The dilution of the components. So there is thrombocytopenia, so platelet concentrate. There is dilution of the clotting factors, so fresh frozen plasma. Then there is consumption of fibrinogen, and so you have to give 4 to 5 grams of fibrinogen IV. And there is excessive clotting because of the release of the stimulation of the clotting system and release of thromboplastin. So one has to give anticoagulant, and that is the infusion of the 2000 units of heparin as a loading, followed by 500 units hourly, and you have to titrate all the parameters of serum fibrinogen degradation product and the bleeding coagulation profile. Next question, that is how will you correct hyponatremia in TOR syndrome? Hyponatremia is also a short note which is asked in exam. Now you will answer, sir, as soon as I get the blood report of serum electrolytes and ABG, then I will initially calculate the amount of sodium to be replaced so as to normalize the serum sodium level. Now the formula for this normalization of the serum sodium is 0.6 WD, that is 0.6 multiplied by weight in kg into deficit. Deficit is calculated by 125 minus observed current serum sodium level. Then I will calculate the infusion fluid, that is the amount of infusion fluid to be given. Normally 2 infusion fluids can be given, that is normal saline or hypertonic 3% saline. If associated metabolic acidosis, then only soda bicarbonate can be given. So I will calculate the amount of IV fluid or the infusion fluid, that is the, how will you calculate? That is the amount of sodium to be replaced divided by the amount of sodium present in the infusion fluid. So the sodium present in the normal saline is 154 milliequivalents per liter, while sodium present in 3% hypertonic saline is 513 milliequivalents per liter. So we have calculated the amount of IV fluids to be infused, but now the rate of correction. So we have to calculate even the rate, and the rate of correction should be slow, and that is 0.5 milliequivalents per liter per hour. That is in 24 hours up to 12 to 15 milliequivalents per liter in 24 hours. If it is severe, then one can increase this rate of correction from 0.5 to 1 milliequivalents per liter for only initial 1 or 2 hours. And there comes the role of what is called as 3% hypertonic saline. Some examiners will ask, doctor, what is the role of hypertonic saline in the hyponatremia secondary to TR syndrome? Then you will say, sir, the role of hyponatremia the role of hypertonic saline in case of hyponatremia in case of TR syndrome is where there is severe symptoms, where the serum sodium is significantly low and the patient is having severe neurological symptoms. Then I will use 3% hypertonic saline. I will use this for the slow correction at rate of 0.5 milliequivalents per liter per hour. First 1 to 2 hours can be corrected fast, that is double rate, that is 1 milliequivalents per liter per hour. So initial 1 or 2 hours one can infuse 150 to 200 cc of 3% hypertonic saline. But if the patient is at risk of development of congestive cardiac failure, should be associated with the infusion, one should give the shot of furosemide. As soon as this particular 1 to 2 hours, one should keep on repeating every 1 or 2 hours serum electrolytes, and the conversion of 3% hypertonic saline to normal saline should be done as fast as possible. The next question examiner can ask, doctor, why you want to correct the hyponatremia slowly? The answer will be, sir, the hyponatremia should be corrected slowly, because if it is rapidly corrected, it will result into central pontine myelolisis, and if it is corrected rapidly and if the patient is having compromised renal function or cardiac function, it can precipitate congestive cardiac failure. So hyponatremia should be corrected slowly. Thank you very much.